State your name and your title.
Rahul Chauhan. I'm an associate professor of management and the Prairie professor of business.
And where did you grow up and what schools did you attend?
I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. I was born and raised there, and I went to University of Texas at Dallas for my undergraduate degree, which was in psychology with a management minor. And then I went to the University of Oklahoma for my master's, which I also received a Ph.D. with some additional schooling.
How have your early experiences influenced your perspective and career choices?
Well, it was a past relationship in which I learned about psychology and the different fields that you can go into with it. And the one that resonated the most with me is the one I have my PhD and master's in, which is industrial and organizational psychology. And so it's essentially business psychology. It's empowering businesses to maximize profits through their people. And there's a lot of layers and depth to that, obviously. And so I've always found that really fascinating, and that allowed me to transition into doubling down into HR, which has a lot of similarities, as well as organizational behavior. And so that triangle between HR, organizational behavior, and industrial organizational psychology is kind of where I specialize at now. I forgot to mention I also have an associate's degree, because I went to community college for 2 years. And I think that alongside my PhD are probably my two proudest degrees. You know, they're pretty unique.
At Why did you decide to come to WT?
I had an option to work at Cal State Long Beach or WT at the time in the market. And so Cal State Long Beach was a beautiful campus. I mean, it really was gorgeous. It had like 4 pools. It was right off the coast. A Japanese garden was on campus, but the issue was that their pay was not that much more than WT's. And when you really look beyond the veil, you start to see that the funding just wasn't that great in that department, based on like what the faculty are driving, what the facilities look like. The faculty had to have a key to their own bathroom because the students couldn't be trusted. It was just different, right? And so I wasn't really feeling the vibe there. And then when WT came about, the pay was really, really amazing at the time. And I think unfortunately we're not quite there today, but back then it was solid because I started in 2015. And you know, being born and raised in Texas, and I never really went far outside of Oklahoma, which, you know, I was ready to come back to Texas after being there for 6 years. I wasn't really familiar with West Texas, but I've always, thinking about Amarillo, I always assumed it was a medium-sized city, which is exactly what it is. And so I was excited. And so when the opportunity came about, you know, it's only 5 hours away from Fort Worth-ish, and my mom's still there, and so it was a no-brainer. I also liked it here. The administration was amazing. Neil Terry was the dean at the time, and our current dean now, Jad Abdullah, he was the associate dean, and so those two guys had a huge influence on me, and we also had Lavelle Mills, who retired. So having that support layer at that administrative level was pretty convincing. I also liked the campus. You know, the facilities were nice because, and also what really allured me was the student population is 50% first generation, which is like way different than the student population at University of Oklahoma. I taught there as well while I was getting my PhD, several courses. And so I feel like you're making an impact here, right? Like teaching actually matters here. The students are motivated to succeed. Either, you know, half of them oftentimes don't even have a financial safety net, and going to school is a gamble for them because they're the first to do it in their families. And so, you know, things like that are really drawing to me because I'm also first gen.
Outside of the classroom, do you have any hobbies?
I do, yeah. I'm a nationally competitive powerlifter. And I've been doing that for about 12 years. I just never stopped. I competed every 3 to 4 months and still do till this day. I just finished my 30th competition. And at this point, you know, powerlifting is I would say it's an independent sport. And so the goal is you set your targets because you have a squat, a bench press, and a deadlift. And the goal is to get the maximum weight you can on each of those lifts. You get 3 attempts at each with your highest score being retained. So you start off, get your initial baseline, see where you're at, learn the rules, and then you set targets. And as long as you just slowly keep improving, which you should over the course of indefinitely, barring things like aging and life circumstances, which fortunately have not affected me tremendously, you will eventually be one of the world's best. And I'm proud to say that's where I'm at right now. the next step would be within the next year or two going to the international level.
What sparked your interest in the sport?
So I used to wrestle in high school and college, and so my stature isn't one that's really built for a lot of sports, right? I'm 5'5", and when I started, I was like 132 pounds. So the beauty of wrestling and powerlifting is they're weight class based, and so you can be very, very competitive within your weight class, and so that natural transition from wrestling to powerlifting was there, because in retrospect, talking to former teammates and stuff, I was always a strength-oriented wrestler, and so I think pound for pound, I've always had a little bit of an advantage when it comes to strength, and so trying out powerlifting was the best of all worlds, because you get to lift super heavy, but there's no cardio involved really, right? Depending on how you train, obviously, there's many different methodologies for that, so that's kind of how I got into it.
Do you have a memorable experience or achievement from your powerlifting journey?
Yeah, I have a couple. I think, I remember when I started getting to that level where if I don't win, it's an anomaly and it's disappointing, because I'm so used to winning at the level that I'm at that anytime I don't, it's really motivating and abnormal, right? And so I remember reaching that point where it's like, okay, like I should win and so there was that moment. There was also the moment where you're basically on a scale from 1 to 10, you have a score, an overall score that compares you to pound for pound to other people regardless of weight class. And so reaching that first target where you're basically at a 9 out of 10, I remember doing that because it's like, okay, only like very elite people can ever reach that level. And so now the goal is to keep pushing it. And then I also remember one time I had food poisoning the night before, and I came, and that was like my best meet performance of my life. And so I'm a firm believer that I think when it comes to sports in general, a lot of people like to make excuses for things like, well, I didn't have enough sleep, or my diet was on point, or I was really stressed out, or I wasn't able to train as much because XYZ, I had a lot of homework, whatever it may be, right? My work schedule doesn't allow me to lift. I hear that a lot. And I'm a firm believer that your body can do some pretty incredible things, and that's based in scientific fact, like what your mind can do relative to what it can do for your body. You hear about, kids trapped under a car and mom can flip over a car. Like, that's just like, your mind limits your body for good reason, right? Because you're going to be destroyed afterwards if you do crazy things like that. But when you can really try to push your body to a true exceeding the limit that you're used to, I think it can nullify a lot of those factors that people like to use as normal excuses. And so I think having food poisoning, I can't imagine a worse condition to compete in. So the fact that I was able to achieve new personal records and still win was, I think, indicative of that philosophy that I try to retain, that there really is no excuse, right? You can always dig a little bit deeper, at least until you get to the hyper elite point where you're among the world's best, because at that point I do think every little thing matters. But what I've noticed in sports, and especially in powerlifting, is that people try to focus on those minute details and perfect them when they don't have a good foundation. In other words, you're going to benefit most with your foundation that you're lacking. Stop focusing on the super advanced details that only influence the hyper elites, right? You're not there yet, it's not going to matter because your form sucks, for example, right? Or your diet sucks, or you're too heavy for your weight class, whatever it may be. There's more important things than the minor details that you only start to tinker with once you're at that super advanced level where you really can't push your body anymore because you've done that. And once you're used to doing that, you get a claw and scrape for every additional pound that you can get on your lifts.
So what does health and fitness mean to you?
I think that the younger generations in general value health and fitness more than stereotypically we've seen from the past generations, and I think it's becoming less than a hobby and more of a lifestyle, whether it be through diet or exercise, and there's so many different avenues for doing both of those, and that's one of the beauties of the last decade or two, really the last 15 years, I would say, is that we started developing a true publicly available science of best practices. Because when I started the sport back in 2012, there was like no internet knowledge of powerlifting, right? It was pretty much all trial and error. There are a few examples out there. YouTube was kind of just starting to pick up in the powerlifting realm. But everybody who was making videos was like clearly on steroids, which is rampant in the field. I'm a lifetime drug-free lifter, and so that's another thing. I only compete with, drug-free leagues. And a lot of strength-based sports, like steroid abuse is there. And so when you see people that are clearly on steroids making videos on how to lift, it's like, does that even apply to a normal person, right? And oftentimes it really doesn't, outside of basic form, foundational things. And then you start to learn about biomechanics. It's like, well, I'm not built like this person. They have super long arms. I don't, so that's why mine looks different. And you start to go down this rabbit hole. But like I said, there really wasn't much knowledge out there. There was trial and error. And if you look at the evolution of exercise and diet science, over the last 15 years, we have so much more knowledge about like best practices and things that are legitimately effective, things that take into account individual differences. And so I think that is one of those things that will definitely continue to promote health and fitness for the future, because I think it's important. I think the United States, over half of the population is obese, by clinical definition. And so I think it'll continue to be a point of interest as nutrition gets better and different types of exercise that appeal to different individuals will get better. I mean, virtual reality is taking off, right? That could be an entire field of itself to get people motivated to be fit, because in general, the world does want you to be healthy, right? I mean, your insurance rates can actually increase if you are unhealthy, right? And so people are universally motivated to keep you relatively healthy.
Yeah. As a professor, how do you balance academic responsibilities with your commitment to powerlifting?
The beauty of academia is that it is very autonomous, and as someone who specializes in the realm of management and HR, I'm a firm believer that the performance metrics that are expected of you, as long as those are being achieved, you should be able to achieve them however you want within the scope of reason and ethically. But beyond that, like, your leisure time is yours. And the beauty of academia is that if you are good at your job, you do have as much leisure time as you want. But on the reverse, we never have a day off, theoretically, right? Because unlike many jobs where you go to work 8 to 5, and once you walk out, like, you're done with the job until the next day, that's not academia, because you could always improve either your course teaching, you could always research and work on some sort of paper. It depends on your balance, because we have faculty here within the College of Business that they come to work from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day, and they're researching all the time. They can't even get away from their research because it stresses them out to do leisurely things, right? And so you see these different extremes, but that's the beauty of the field, is that it's kind of up to you as long as you're reaching those performance metrics. And fortunately, I have been able to do that over the last several years. Especially after being tenured, I would like to say I'm good at my job by objectively speaking. And so having said that, it allows me to focus on the things I like to do, like powerlifting on the side. I also play a lot of video games, and stuff like that. And I think that's kind of the best parts of the job.
Are there any specific principles or lessons from powerlifting that you apply to your daily life?
Yes, I think there are several. Obviously, number one is that you can always dig deeper. Excuses don't really matter, right? If you want to do something bad enough, you can always find a way to do it. And I think it's really easy to come up with an infinite amount of excuses to do something you don't want to do. Also, one thing I learned that I think is really important is that, I don't have a realistic expectation that I will ever be like the world's best overall. But once I reach 40, I think there's a probability, right, based on metrics and who's currently reached that level and whatever. But having said that, I think there's definitely things I could do to make me a better powerlifter. There's things I could do to make me a better professor. But the question is, how much do you want to do those things, right? And if the reality is you don't want to do those things, then you're either not going to do it well or you're going to do it poorly. And so I think finding that balance of who you are realistically, and for example, I don't stretch. There's not a lot of athletes out there who don't recommend stretching, right? It can boost recovery. It can keep you healthy. It can prevent you from getting injured, whatever it may be. Like, that's probably something I should do, or at least roll out and whatever. But I don't like to do it. And so I have adapted my lifestyle and training to where I don't do that because I don't want to do it, and I'm still effective. And so that's one of the biggest things, is that just kind of learning, like, okay, there is a best path towards doing something, or there's certainly best practices you should do. But if you're already at a level where you're kicking ass, essentially, like, do you really need to do everything, including the things that you hate to do, right? Because you're already there. And so that's one of the best things I've learned, is that, like, okay, like, if you're already reaching what your goals are and you're doing it successfully, then you don't have to do all the extra stuff that everyone's telling you to do, right? You can find your own path towards success as long as you, in fact, are successful. And so I would say that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned that helped transition. And, you know, truly academia and powerlifting for me go hand in hand because they complement each other, the approach I take.